Hello and welcome to the Game Design Podcast. My name is Brad Carney and I am the founder of Final Boss Entertainment, which recently developed Rack. If you're unfamiliar with what Rack is, just imagine if the developers of Borderlands found a time machine and they went back to the early 90s and they hung out at arcades, and then they went and teamed up with the people at id Software who were making Doom, and they all decided to make a game together. That's basically what Rack would be. So this week I really want to explore the design of platformers, and I want to focus specifically on probably the most popular one in recent years, Shovel Knight? Actually, I think it's Knight. Shovel Knight. So what got me interested in doing an episode on Shovel Knight is that at the end of last year, I found myself trying to work through the massive backlog I'd built up through the Steam Winter Sale, and as I fell into a hole on Propeller Knight stage for the 443rd time, I angrily thought to myself, instant death pits? How is this still a thing? The important thing, though, is that they are still a thing. Not just instant death hazards, but platformers as a whole are too. With games like Super Meat Boy and Shovel Knight, platformers are still incredibly popular and not showing signs of going away anytime soon. I think there's more to that than just nostalgia, too. After all, there have been other genres which were once popular and haven't managed to stick around. No need to name any. But platformers have maintained popularity. So why do I think you there in gaming planet land, that's a real place, shut up, still crave platformers? I think it's because platformers fundamentally lend themselves toward having great game design. First of all, platformers tend to be very compartmentalized. Usually you'll play the game in very specific individual sections or levels. Usually each level has its own set of rules and mechanics, allowing you to focus on them individually. If you think back to the first episode where we talked about games being skill building activities for survival, this is great. If you're building a skill, you don't want there to be anything distracting you from that so you can engage fully. If you're learning to play the drums and the guitar, you don't practice them both at the same time. You learn them individually, separately. If you want to learn how to deal with fire, ice, and water in a game, it's easier to learn how to deal with them if there's a fire level, ice level, and a water level, as opposed to 3 levels all involving fire, ice, and water. So, does Shovel Knight compartmentalize? You bet. There are 8 knights you fight throughout the game, and each has their own level with its own mechanics. There's an ice level, a wind level, a poison level. There's even bonus levels which teach you in even more specific ways, like your ability to use the phase locket to go invisible and avoid insta-kill spikes. I also think platformers do a great job of showing you the results of your actions. If a game is trying to test and develop some ability of yours, it helps when the feedback is crystal clear. It's important to know when you messed up and how you messed up, and platformers do a fantastic job of that. If you jump and don't clear a pit, you know you jumped early. If you run into a pit before getting your jump off, you know you jumped late. If you get grazed by a cannonball and that knocks you into a pit, you know, well, don't get hit by cannonballs. What's great about Shovel Knight is that not only does it make the feedback of how you die nice and clear, but it also gives you an opportunity and immediate incentive to improve and do better right on the spot. When you die in Shovel Knight, instead of the game being all, do it again and this time don't suck, which can get repetitive, you drop some of your money and then return to the nearest checkpoint. This encourages you to get back to where you were before and collect your money and get past it. All while knowing that if you fail again, that money is gone for good. It's the game telling you, it's okay if you fail once, but make sure you learn from this. But I think what platformers do best is create situations of suspense. By definition, platformers have you jump from one location to the next, with there being some sort of penalty for failing to do so. This means that every time you make one of these jumps, there's a moment of dread where you're saying to yourself, am I gonna make it? Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god! Followed by a feeling of relief and triumph. Or in my case, agony. I imagine it's similar to the feeling basketball players experience when they take a shot. They don't know for sure whether or not it's going in, but when it finally does, man, it's sweet. I think we all love that feeling, and it's why tension and release are so common in TV shows and movies as well. And Shovel Knight accomplishes this not only with the jumps, but in a couple of other ways as well. First, for those of you who aren't familiar with the game, when you jump and press down, your character, Mr. Shovelsworth, that is his name, basically uses his shovel, or her shovel when they do the Gender Bender expansion, as a pogo stick that you can use to bounce off things, which is a completely realistic shovel mechanic. And these things can be bubbles, enemies, slime, and so on and so forth. It bounces you up pretty high, and there are often some pretty suspenseful situations where you're unsure whether or not you're gonna hit the thing you're bouncing off in the first place, or whether you're gonna get high enough to reach your destination. It's not as tense as the instant death pits, because there's usually isn't a threat of death there, but there's still some tension there. The other thing is that there are some enemy attacks that you can deflect with your shovel. You've got to wait until the enemy projectile is moments from hitting you, and then smack it back at them with a shovel. Another realistic mechanic. There's always some tension there, because if you time it too early, your shovel whiffs and the projectile hits you, maybe killing you. And if you time it too late, it's already hit you by the time you swing, and again, it may kill you. So the game does a great job in the suspense department. Coming up, I'll be talking about the design of Shovel Knight with Murphy and Problems from GamerGiving. I'm joined now by Ryan and Murphy, who are both co-hosts with GamerGiving. For those of you who don't know, it's basically this great charity. Murphy, why don't you tell them a little bit about it?
Well, what do we do at GamerGiving on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, and some random times in between? We host charity streams for about 4 hours. Mondays, we usually do board games. Wednesday, we have this thing called Backseat Gaming, where one of our other hosts, Steven, plays a game that me and or Problems or somebody else that is on the stream with us has played before, and we try to coach him through it. And then on Fridays, we do fighting games. We've raised around $11,000 since November.
Wow. And
right now we're currently working on a $5,000 goal with Make-A-Wish, and we also work with Extra Life as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And just real quick, so you mentioned that Wednesday segment, Backseat Gaming. One of the episodes you're going to be having coming up in, what is it, next week? You're going to be playing Shovel Knight, and I'm going to be part of that. So that's kind of a little bit how this episode came to be. So
pretty hype about it.
Yeah. And then Ryan, did you want to tell them a little bit about yourself? Any more about the charity or anything you wanted to mention?
Yeah, we have been
I know you guys are
pretty hard on this stuff for a while.
Okay, go ahead.
We did a 24-hour stream not too long ago that was pretty successful, and we've got more content coming down towards the community. Tomorrow, actually, I'm going to be starting my own individual segment, which I have affectionately titled Problems Weeaboo Wonderland, and it's going to be just all things Japanese. I'm going to be playing Japanese games, talking about anime and stuff like that. Cool. So that's going to be pretty fun. But it's been a blast working with the charity, and it's allowed me to meet cool people such as yourself, Brad, and get to talk about cool games like Shovel Knight.
Yeah, and Shovel Knight is that's. We're talking about that today. Yeah, a little bit about platformers, but I really want to focus on Shovel Knight because it's current, it's popular, and I know it's a game that both of you are into and big fans of, and that's. So yeah, so I mean, kind of what I wanted to do is kind of just talk about the design of the game, just like really break it down and kind of talk about like why all the things that it does that makes it such a great game. I mean, obviously there's a bunch of aesthetic things it does, like that, like the soundtrack for that game is just incredible. And all the artwork for it, the pixel. The 8-bit pixel retro art, I mean that's all fantastic. But I also think there's a lot that the game does, which makes it fun and compelling, even without all the fancy graphics and music. So I guess one of the things that one of the things I was talking about in the intro is the fact that kind of like how when you die, it drops the little sacks of money, so it gives you a chance to kind of adapt to the mistake you made, and gives you a chance to correct it and go back and get your money. Have you had any kind of experiences with that? Where it's either not worked out, or just you keep dying at a place and aren't able to get your money back. How has that affected the gameplay for you?
Well, it's definitely a really interesting mechanic, and I like it a lot because it sort of establishes this sort of risk and reward balance that you have to take into consideration, because if you're going through a level and you fall into one of the the instant death pits, as you referred to them in your intro, and you've got those sacks of money left behind, but they're still floating over that instant death pit that you missed the first time, you have to consider whether it's worth it to try to go back and get your money, or if you just want to keep moving forward. And I think one of the big things that it really establishes that the of Shovel Knight's adventuring, aside from saving his friend or whatever, is that he's out for treasure. That's what he does. That's his job. He's a treasure hunter. And so it's a cool mechanic only because it establishes a very important gameplay aspect, the risk and reward, but also because it further cements who the character is, and what he's doing in the world. But you run into several situations. I've run into several situations playing that game where I'm jumping around and trying to get through a level, and then I just do that one slip up over a thing of lava or something like that, and I know that money's gone forever, because if I try to go down and get it, I'm just going to die.
But it's interesting, when you're talking about how it's risky to go after it. The fact that it's broken into 3 separate sacks, that does make that really interesting, because if it was just one sack of money that dropped when you died, if you had to go down in some pit to try and get it, and then try and get back to safety somehow. If there was if only one sack of money dropped, as long as you touched that, even if you died again, you'd just be back in the same position. But because it's split into 3, you can't really afford to let that happen. You really need to get all 3 of those sacks to get back to even. So if you take a risk going after one of those 3 and you fall into the pit and die again, you're really up a creek at that point. At that point you're not getting all your money back. So it really makes you think about whether or not you want to go for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't that something that came from Dark Souls?
Yeah, I was going to say that Dark Souls does use a similar mechanic in that souls are your not only your currency, but your main means of leveling up your character. So as you go through those games and you collect the souls and stuff, when you die, your souls are left where you died, and if you die again before you can get those, they're never coming back.
Okay.
So it does have a similar risk and reward type.
Right, yeah. So instead of money, it's experience. Yeah, and for something like Dark Souls, I could imagine that being a lot more infuriating than Shovel Knight, because in Shovel Knight, it's I don't know. One of the things I do want to talk to you guys about is it doesn't seem like the money matters all that much. Whereas in Dark Souls, you need that experience to level up, otherwise you're just not going to be able to progress through the game, period. But in Shovel Knight, the money doesn't seem like it's nearly as important.
It's not as important, yeah, but early on, you need to collect as much money as possible, because in order to increase your magic or your hit points, you need some sort of dosh, and especially if you want to get some of your special weapons, especially earlier on in the game. A little bit later, you get so much money, it's to the point where even if you do die a couple times on a level, it doesn't matter too much.
Right.
But early on, it does. just to level up your character a little bit. But
yeah, so
as it progresses, it honestly doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, which almost makes the deaths like at the end like less consequential, which I don't know, it kind of seems
frustrating.
Yeah, like it's just more of a nuisance than like, oh my god, I need that money, I can't die. So yeah, it's like when you're playing through the game on like New Game Plus, it's like I died, so
I have everything, I'm good.
Right, yeah. Like the only thing that matters is having to go back to the checkpoint. So I mean, like Ryan was bringing up like the when you die, like there's this whole like risk reward element. When you like if the sacks of money you drop are in a dangerous spot, it's like, do you risk going for those or risk dying again? Another spot where I think you kind of see like that same kind of dynamic is with destroying the checkpoints, the destructible checkpoints. So for those who don't know, who haven't played the game, it's like every level there will be like 5 checkpoints, and you have the option of breaking them and getting money out of them. So you're kind of gambling that you're not going to die, and then the reward for that is money. And so it's really kind of an interesting thing, but I wonder if because, and of course early on in the game the money is interesting, but kind of later on the money isn't all that interesting. So it kind of takes the teeth out of that mechanic a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, the reason why I like the way the checkpoints are set up, because it's kind of like make your own hard mode, more or less.
Yeah.
Because right from the start, with the exception of the tutorial level, you can break every single one of those, and more times than not, like with a Mega Man game or any NES or Super Nintendo platformer, if you died 9/10 of the way through the level, you're going to get taken back to the beginning anyways. Right. So I like it because it offers a challenge. It does give you a certain amount of money by breaking them, but that's just a reward for if somebody wants to make it difficult on themselves. Okay, well, you broke the checkpoint. If you die, you have to go back to the beginning. Here's a couple points.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with that. Yeah, but it's funny. I mean, I don't know about you guys. Like every time I've done that and then like I die and I have to go back super far, I'm just
regretted it immediately.
I'm such a chump. Oh my god. I bet wrong.
I'm like, this level's gonna be hard mode. I'm gonna run through it. It's gonna be easy. I die like right after the last checkpoint, and I just turn the game off. And I'm like, I'm just gonna step away for a while because now I'm disappointed in myself.
Rage quit activated. But yeah, it's yeah. So yeah, I mean that's really interesting. And it's kind of funny how like it doesn't want you doing that on the first level, and I think it's because I don't think they want to frustrate you too much like in the beginning. Like I mean the first level is very much like a tutorial. It's very much kind of introducing the basic mechanics of the game. I mean, but it's like before you can do I went and played through this when I was doing research for this. But so you'll come to a spot where it's like the only way to progress is by doing the little pogo move.
Yeah.
So it's very kind of trying to introduce all these elements to you in a very nice sterile environment without things trying to kill you. And I feel like they just want to focus on that, just like the deliberate learning, and don't like if you could break those and you did that like on accident, like if you're a newbie or something, then you go all the way back, it could really give people a bad first impression of the game, which
of course,
which very dangerous thing. But I mean, one of the other things I did want to talk about with this game was the kind of progression of the I do think it's very interesting that it gives you a map, so you kind of get kind of an open world in a sense to explore, but it only lets you like pick from like the next 3 possible areas you can go. Like it doesn't just give you like the entire map right off the bat. It's like, okay, you beat the intro level, and then you can pick one of 4 next places to go, and then once you beat all those, then it opens up the next 4, and you can play them in any order. I think that's really interesting. It's a way to like it's giving you exploration options, but at the same time, it's not letting you bite off more than you can chew, probably. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that's something that's worked out well for the game? Do you like having that freedom to kind of do kind of having a stage select screen in a sense, or?
Yeah, I think it works really well for the game because it gives you like that big world map, and you can sort of see what's out there, but you are limited to deciding one of like 3 different ways to go, and there are locked gates that prevent you from going too far, beating a certain boss or whatever you get. But it establishes that whole like sense of adventure that is prevalent throughout the whole game, and I think it's really cool because it allows the player to decide what they want to tackle first. If you've got you're on a section of the map and you've got 2 different levels that you could go to, you can decide, do I want to go after this, spooky graveyard place, or do I want to try the laboratory, and sort of just decide based on, personal preference without knowing anything about what those levels are going to be like yet.
Yeah.
Just sort of let you decide, based on that, where you want to go.
It's
and
like
I also think
the choices you get to make too are like meaningful. Like you're not just deciding between like 2 places you've never been, so it's like, oh, how am I supposed to know? Let me just flip a coin. No, you get to pick between like a town and like the next like the graveyard place, which are two
Right.
very clearly different things. So you can decide like, oh, I've got this, let me head to the next area, or I need to go to town, I need to buy some more supplies, I need to see if there's more artifacts I can buy.
And I think that the open world map, the way that it's set up, lends itself very well to the mechanic wherein like random enemy encounter will pop up on certain sections of the map, and it'll show like the little guy walking back and forth.
Yeah.
And a few of those actually are actually like, I don't know, I guess secret, not really secret, but sort of like
They're mini
optional
bosses,
boss battles.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you guys think the role of those is? Because as far as I can tell, like there's not too much upside to fighting them. Like they just kind of appear there. It's just kind of like a random obstacle you have to deal with.
Honestly, I think it's for length, because there's only a set amount of worlds that have bosses in them, and then at the end you have main boss and boss rush and stuff like that. I think there is 4 or 5 mini bosses that I can remember of. There's a guy in a town, and then a couple people that you meet out in between these levels that are walking around, as Ryan mentioned. One, it gives you an extra challenge in between stuff, so it gives you another chance to hone your skills, because honestly, some of the bosses are a little more difficult than the main bosses that you'll fight in the other worlds. Especially, I think one of them was Zubaz, which was a reference to 2 Best Friends, which I found pretty funny. And that's where it comes back with the map. It's very reminiscent of Super Mario Brothers 3 with the way that's set up.
Yeah.
Because this entire game is just reference and callbacks and like to all these retro games, and it's one of the reasons why I backed it, because I was a backer on Kickstarter and I was really excited for it. But mostly I think that these mini bosses were a way to just add something different to the regular flow of the game. It's like, okay, here's something new. Maybe I can get something cool out of this. I know you get money. I don't think you get items from them, if I can remember correctly. But they each have their own storyline. So not only does it add to the length of the game in terms of playability, it also adds to the lore of the world and things like that. So I honestly think it's just there to give you something extra, something cool to do. They're all tied back to the Order of No Quarter in some way, and you can get a little bit of money off of them. And like when you beat Zubaz, like he just starts slamming his hands and legs on the ground and crying like this big burly dude just throwing a tantrum. So it's just there for you, man. I think that's all it really is, just to something extra for the player.
At first, I thought you said they were there to add to Lent. I'm like, what? Like,
yeah, they're adding the Lent.
Like you give them up for 40 days? Or...
Yeah, you got to give up the mini bosses.
Yeah, right.
For Lent.
Yeah.
You can only fight main storyline bosses. That's it.
Yeah.
I've had way too many mini bosses. I'm starting to get chubby.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think you're right. Like it definitely does add to the variety of the game. You know, it's you definitely have like your regular levels in the towns, and that's great and everything, but it's that and the little bonus levels that they have, which we'll get into in a second. But yeah, I mean, it really adds to the variety of the game. You know, it breaks up the whole monotony of, all right, beat this level, go to town, get some stuff. Beat another level, go to town, get some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it really spices things up. So I mean, like I just hinted at, it also has these little bonus levels which kind of have their own incredibly specific mechanics and things you do. Like one of them, it's you use this item called the knuckle duster, which is basically this thing you jump in the air and you can if you punch a block, you move forward through it. So if you keep doing that, you just kind of hang in the air. And so there's a whole level that's dedicated to just this mechanic, and it's really fun. I mean, they're little mini mazes that you got to go through. And so I mean, the mini bosses, they do a great job of just really spicing the game up and keeping it fresh. What did you guys think of those?
I think the reason why they did that is because most of the time when you get these special weapons, granted, yeah, you can use them in the level to help you out, but you're kind of just thrown into it. So they give you these extra levels, at least I think. They give you these extra levels so you can get used to the weapon that you just got 2 worlds ago.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because it needs to be, otherwise you're not going to know how to use it right, and it kind of teaches you through that extra level, through risk and reward, how to use it effectively, what you're capable of with this. Like you said with the knuckle duster, if there's 8 dirt blocks, you can keep hitting that and just going right through every single one of them.
Yeah.
So if there's a big pit of lava and you're like, I can't jump over this is impossible, then you see those blocks up there, you hit one, you hit a second, you miss, you fall into lava. You're like, okay, well, I can clear these levels like that if I'm having a difficult time jumping. So it also gives you a way of taking that ability or that skill that you just learned and got rewarded for at the end of these bonus rounds to take it into the next level to see if that can help you at all through your journey trying to get to the next.
So it's kind of like a side
boss.
tutorial kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's
a side tutorial that doesn't hold your hand, because if you die, I think you only get 1 or 2 shots at it. I could be wrong about that.
I think it's you're kind of locked into it, because there's no checkpoints on the level. So if you get to the end of it and then you die, your bags of money drop there at the end, and then you start back at the beginning. So it's you've either got to beat the whole thing, or you leave and abandon your money. So
exactly.
It's really it's interesting how it locks you in like that. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to add on that is that it also really gives you a chance to kind of use those relics, I guess they're called in the game, to their full potential. Because I mean okay, in a lot of Mega Man games, you'll get certain artifacts throughout the game, and then it's once you get to Dr. Wily's stage, you have to use those at some point, Rush Jet or whatever. But in these games, they don't require you to do that. The levels are designed so that they can be beaten without using any of these relics. So
yeah,
if you have a special level where it's okay, you got this thing here, here, go ahead and use it in all its glory. It gives you a real chance to kind of explore, this new item you've obtained, and just really see how much fun you can have with it.
Yeah, which is one of the things, because the propeller is probably my favorite one, just because it makes all the platforming super easy. Because I'm not what you would call relatively good at video games, even though I love platformers. It's just a lot of attrition, because I die a lot, especially the other night when I played Shovel Knight.
That's everyone.
Yeah, well, the other night when I played Shovel Knight, I ended up dying around 9 times on the tutorial level because I may or may have not been handicapped in terms of my mindset at the time. So I had some struggles with that, and as I progressed.
Are you okay now, though?
What's that?
Are you okay now, though?
Yeah, oh no, I'm fine now.
Okay.
I'm perfectly okay now. But yeah, it can be challenging even on the tutorial level. So don't even let that fool you.
Yeah.
This game is full of surprises.
Yeah, definitely. Just to kind of finish the thought on like the whole like how there's an introductory level and kind of difficulty and all that. It really seemed like it got pretty hard at the end. Like it kind of seemed like in the beginning, it was kind of easy, like borderline holding your hand and stuff. I kind of sailed through it at the beginning, and it's like all of a sudden you get to the last tier of bosses. Propeller Knight, Polar Knight. Oh god, and like it just like the difficulty just ramps up like crazy at the end. Like I remember just like raging like crazy on Propeller Knight stage. Cause
I did too. That was probably my most difficult one, mostly for the fact that I'm not a patient person. So when I was playing that level, I was like, I'm just gonna go through as fast as possible. I mean, it's an air world. I have this propeller now. That's what they want you to do. And believe it or not, you can do that, but it's not always the best option.
Yeah.
So it also teaches you a little bit of patience. But especially with Propeller Knight and Polar Knight, those were some of my most difficult levels.
Yeah,
and then not to mention the final boss. That I've spent more time on that, which is what you should do. But I spent more time on that than I did anything else.
Yeah, I mean, not to spoil it for everyone, but I thought the first form was harder. Like she's like ripping the floor out from under you.
That's where my bad platforming skills came in, and I struggled pretty hard just to get past that part.
Yeah. And I think also like a big part of that fight, which I don't think I knew until later on, but is knocking the fireballs back at her.
Mm-hmm.
That's I mean I kind of talked about that a little bit in the intro, but I mean that's a tense thing. It's really hard to like time it in that game because like your range with your shovel is so short,
and it's very quick too.
Yeah, it is.
Which is one of the things that they kind of teach you in the King Knight level, because you have all those mages shooting fireballs at you and stuff, and you're a good distance away from them where you can jump over them if you want, or you could try to hit them. So it teaches you that early on in the game, but it's also a mechanic that doesn't work all the time because some of the things that you try to hit back just don't work.
Right.
So it's literally hit or miss, which I enjoy, but it can also be frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, and
especially on that last level.
Yeah, and see, I didn't even know like you could hit the things back at the the regular mages. I think until like around after I had beaten the game. So I kind of went through like most of the game without knowing like, oh hey, there's this whole other tool I have in my arsenal. So yeah, that happens sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean the final boss is like once in the last phase, it's kind of like once you figure out the trick, it's just kind of you just kind of wail away at it and don't.
Yeah, once you figure out the pattern, which it's not the same every time. There's probably like 2 or 3 sets of patterns that I noticed because that's how many times that I played it.
Oh, okay.
It's just that last boss. But there's about 2 or 3 sets of patterns that she uses, I think. And it's all a matter of, okay, which one is it this time?
Right.
So I think there's a tiny bit of RNG in there.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely sure. That just might be my delusions talking right now.
And this is part of me just, being a scrubby player, but I always assume like it's always randomized with bosses. So like I'm never thinking like, okay, well he's gonna do this and then he's gonna do that and then he's gonna do that. Like I'm always trying to like react to everything like it's done randomly.
Yeah.
And I know that's not the case in a lot of games. And I kind of feel like sometimes they purposely make it not randomized so that like if you're really having trouble with it, you can just kind of like memorize like, okay, well first he does this, then he does this, then he does this, and then it makes it all that much easier for you.
Well, yeah, like especially with older games with NES and Super Nintendo, Mega Man games, and a lot of Capcom games just in general, especially on the NES. they all pretty much had the same type system. A boss comes out, it has 3 to 4 set attacks and movements. They generally follow the same pattern, and you can figure it out based on trial and error and timing and things like that, which is one of the reasons why I like the way Shovel Knight did their bosses, because it has those same aspects. But this entire game to me is like, what if the NES was like a supercomputer? What, like, all the stuff that we can do with it? So the bosses have more attacks, they're faster, it's more randomized in terms of their patterns, so you don't know exactly what's going to come out each time, which is cool. And a lot of them have like this area of effect attack. Like with King Knight, he has confetti, which I didn't know hurt me for the longest time. And the first time I played
Dude, come on, everyone knows confetti hurts you.
Dude, yeah, I was like, okay, well, it's just like a background thing. He's like, yay, confetti. And I would die so much. And I'm like, he's not hitting me. What's happening? And I'd go back and play it, and I'd be like, oh, the confetti hurts.
Yeah.
And then Mole Knight has like these...
oh, yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, I know what you mean.
The fire attacks that he has spreads across the entire room in the same pattern.
Yeah.
But the difference is I know fire hurts.
Yeah, right.
Unlike confetti.
Fire bad, fire hurts. Yeah, I mean, I did want to talk about the bosses quite a bit in this game. You know, it's kind of funny. Like in a game like Mega Man, like it kind of seemed like once you learn the pattern of like basically any Mega Man boss, like you can take it down fairly easily with the you know, just the regular old Mega Buster. But in this, you know, it could be that I'm just a big old dummy. I didn't really get that sense for the bosses in this game. It's kind of seemed like they had patterns, but it was still pretty hard to successfully evade all the attacks and everything. And I think a lot of it comes from just the fact that the range with your shovel is so small, and you know, and the bosses are so fast and everything compared to you. I mean, like Propeller Knight, you know, he's like zipping back and forth as he's doing his little fencing moves. It's kind of hard for you to deal with it. You know, it's if you try and, like, you know, bounce your little pogo bounces on him, you're kind of at the mercy of, you know, his excuse me, of his timing and everything. And it just seems like you don't have like enough control of your character. You don't have enough range to really be able to take the bosses down flawlessly if you understand the patterns. Am I wrong on that, or do I just suck?
Well, believe it or not, for me, Propeller Knight was probably the easiest one for me.
Really?
Because I spent so long on the entire level just to get there. By the end of it, I was like, all right, I'm ready for like a crazy boss battle. This is going to be nuts. Like, it's like going to be wind everywhere, and the thing's going to be attacking me left and right. And then I got there, and I'd figured out his pattern, and I bounced on his head a couple times, and I beat him. But it can be like that. The majority of what you really want to do is get above them and pogo stick on their head, because more times than not, that's a fairly invincible move, because if you're just bouncing up on top of them, as long as you're on their head and away from their direct attacks, because most of their attacks come left or right, not too many come from above you. As long as you can stay on there for a couple bounces, dodge their attack, and get back on there, that's usually the best way to take them down. But using relics too, especially the fireball, for range stuff, just to keep away. So jump on their head, dodge their attacks, run away, fireball, repeat.
Yeah. Propeller Knight became way easier once I figured out you could throw the arcing hooks at him.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is much easier. But yeah, I mean, I think a prime example of what you're talking about is Tinker Knight when you face him in his second form.
Oh god.
So I mean, you climb up on his arm and then you bounce up on his head. So you get like 3 bounces before, because he's shooting these little like diagonal things at you. So you gotta respect those. You gotta dodge those. But you can get like two or 3 bounces before he shoots out one of those that's actually gonna hit you. And then you just kind of bounce around it, or you get down to the ground to safety, and then you get up there again and pogo your way to victory. But yeah, I mean he's definitely a pretty easy one to beat without taking any damage. But I guess the one that I really had in mind, where it just seemed like, oh, there's no pattern here, this guy's just a spammer, is Plague Knight. He's just kind of like bouncing around, throwing bombs at you, and it's like, sit still, come on!
I think that's Problem's favorite boss, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Problem, what am I doing wrong with
I
him?
really like Plague Knight. Well...
Hey, since you haven't seen me play, how are you supposed to approach him?
Well, from my experience with Plague Knight, what I came to understand is that you can't rely on any consistency with him whatsoever. Like, you have to be as on guard as you can be. Like, as you play him, like, you'll learn, because as with most things in a game like this, you're probably going to die a few times before you finally get it. But as you play him, you learn like what his arsenal is, like what he has at his disposal. But the wild card, I guess, is how he's actually going to use it. So you kind of have to be really quick and on your toes the whole time to be able to catch what he's doing. For me, it's like you guys were talking about, like with most of the bosses and stuff, you can sort of pogo them to death. And for me, one of the things that I found really helpful is when he raises those like purple blocks or whatever, you can, and this is, I'm sure you've already figured this out, but you can like pogo off of those. And when he's sort of teleporting around and stuff, I think he'll teleport. I think he does it more the lower his health is, but I think he'll teleport 2 times, and then he'll pause to throw something at you. Mm-hmm. And it sort of depends on how close you are to him. And he's a very unpredictable character, but that's part of why I like him so much. And I think just in general, he's sort of a testament to how good the boss fights can be in this game, because all of the bosses are really, really good fights, in my opinion, but they're all they have their own thing. It reminds me of another favorite series of mine, Monster Hunter. You are in a situation where you are at a severe disadvantage to the thing that you're fighting. You have your resources, but you are going to have to work to figure out how to make those lead to victory, and you have to learn sort of pattern and movesets and how the boss changes as its health goes down further, stuff like that. It's very very dynamic way of fighting bosses, and I think that it's sort of just like everything else in this game. It's a very big love letter back to the days of yore, where you're retro games and you're encountering these bosses and you're like, oh man, this guy, it's really cool. I love all the bosses in this game, but Plague Knight is my favorite.
So do you think that if this game kind of had a Mega Man style mechanic where it's each boss had a weakness, I mean kind of like the first incarnation of Tinker Knight does, where you put the little the ground what is it, the thing you stand on where it boot flies forward, but I mean that thing kills him in one hit. It's do you think if all the bosses had something like that, it would kind of ruin it?
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that they didn't do that weakness kind of thing, because like I said, the way that it is, it forces you as the player to figure out how to work with the resources that you have available to beat that boss. It's not a very weaknesses are a good mechanic for bosses in some games, but in this game, I feel like it would be as fulfilling as it is when you finally do beat the boss, because it is very much about you have to figure out how do you have available to beat that guy, and the game's not gonna hold your hand about it. It's your hero, so do it.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I never really liked about Mega Man, how it's every boss had a weakness. It kind of seemed like a really cheap way to beat them. It's like, if you know the boss's weakness, it's you don't have to respect what they're doing. You don't have to learn their patterns. You don't have to learn how they operate. You just need to kind of spam them with whatever weapon beats them, quote unquote, and that's that. Like, you don't. It doesn't. It's not really testing you on any kind of knowledge or anything other than knowing what the boss weakness is and knowing which order to progress. You know, which order to pick levels from at the stage selection screen, which kind of seems like a really silly thing for a game to reward you for. But yeah, so I mean, I'm glad this game doesn't. I'm with you. I'm glad this game doesn't do that. It helps differentiate it from Mega Man, and you know, it does make the fights more interesting, I think.
Yeah, especially if there was like some sort of electrical weapon, and then you go to fight Treasure Knight. That boss fight would be over in one hit because he's surrounded by water, which Treasure Knight is one of the most interesting boss battles to me, just from the mechanics that they gave him with the way he like uses his grappling hook to fly all over the place and then hit you from above. He can be pretty difficult. But if you just had like a cattle prod or something, just granted you would probably die too since you're metal.
Yeah, right.
And in a suit of armor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad they didn't do that.
Yeah. It also makes the the level where you have to fight them all again. I hope that's not a spoiler. Anyone who's played any kind of Mega Man game, I'm sure, kind of knew that was coming at some point.
Yeah, there's the boss rush is pretty fun.
Yeah, it definitely. And it really gives that some teeth too. You know, if it was just, oh well, I have all the weapons now. I just need to know which one to use on whatever boss and kill them for free. Exactly. It would definitely.
And the good thing about the boss rush is, granted, everything does have a pattern in terms of the main bosses, but whoever you fight is, from what I've experienced, because I've done the boss rush probably 7 or 8 times in a playthrough, because that's how many times I died. But the setup for the bosses that you face are random.
Yep.
So you're not able to like strategize. Like, okay, well, I have Plague Knight first. I can get through him, and then I got Tinker Knight. I got to do this, and then I have Polar Knight. I got to do that. So it changes every time. So those patterns aren't as integral into your strategy because you don't know who you're going to be fighting first, last, third, or second. So
yeah. It really keeps you on your toes, and it's something that I think is like a nice little detail, a nice little perk for that. Is like after you kill them, like, you know, they're all, because when you kill them, you kind of like fling them off the side of the tower, and they kind of grasp on the side for dear life. But the order that they're all like sticking there on the side of the tower is the order that you beat them in. It's not like some pre-computed graphic.
Yeah, especially if you fight Tinker Knight first, he's holding on to everybody, which is the funniest thing. Because that's what happened to me first time I played it. I fought Tinker Knight first. And I think Polar Knight was last.
Oh my
so
God.
We have this tiny little dude holding on to all these people with the biggest, buffest dude at the very bottom. And I'm like, this is ridiculous.
That's not realistic.
Tinker Knight's too strong.
Oh man, that's I gotta like look for like a screenshot of that.
If I could find a screenshot of that, because that's one of the the first time I did that, I just stopped there, and I thought I took a screenshot of it, but I didn't. But yeah, that was one of the funniest things to me from the boss rush.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. So one of the other things that I touched on in the intro is kind of talking about how a lot of platformers, like they tend to have like very like specific and individualized levels. So it's like a lot of them will have like the ice level, the fire level, and I mean certainly Shovel Knight is no exception. There's the poison level with Plague Knight, and of course, there's the ice level with Polar Knight. What do you guys think about that as a mechanic? I mean, do you like it when it's like kind of each level kind of has its own thing, or if it's like, or if it's just kind of like 10 levels that are, kind of have the same stuff thrown about them? I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I do, but I hate ice and water levels. For some reason, I can't stand them.
Sure. I think they're bad. I think water's worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another thing with going back to the retro era. There was always like jungle or desert or volcano, ice, water. tropical theme. There are always different environmental themes with everything. So I think that's why they did it. Also, it's a good way to, in terms of like the creative process, you're like, well, we got to figure out our next boss. What don't we have? We don't have an ice level. Okay, well, let's make an ice boss.
Yeah.
What should we make ice boss look like? So it kind of helps you come up with a vision in your mind as to what you want to do with it. And then the mechanics come from there, because with like an ice level, obviously you're going to have ice to make it harder to stand on. You'll be sliding all over the place, which is a lot. There's a lot of that in Polar Knights level, which can be really frustrating. In Treasure Knights, you're underwater. You're going to be moving fairly slower, and you're not going to be able to I guess not really have the time to respond correctly, because you're having to account for a delay because you're moving slower underwater.
It's like you have to like know like where you're gonna like land, and like what's gonna happen ahead of time, because like you
gotta hope to know where you're floating isn't going to be your death, more or less.
Yeah. But that's an interesting point you brought up earlier about how it's, kind of it's like once you decide, like we want to have an ice level, that kind of dictates the mechanics and kind of what the boss should look like and everything. It's kind of funny. It's a little counterintuitive, but it seems to really be true. Limitations actually tend to help creativity. It's like if I tell you like come up with 10 different characters, like you'd probably be like, dude, I have no idea. It's
what type of character?
Right? Yeah, right. It's like you need those limitations to know. Okay, well, to kind of have like some kind of direction to go on.
Exactly.
And like I'll give you an example. So like I'm working on this new game. I don't want to get too much into that, or you kind of go off on that tangent. But I was trying to come up with like monster names for this game, and it's like I kind of had like all these ideas for like different monsters I wanted, but I had no idea what to call them. I was just kind of trying to come up with like generic cool sounding names like Zeborg or whatever. But I wasn't really getting anywhere. So finally I decided what if I kind of start by like, what if I take like the first 3 letters of a musical instrument, and then I kind of fill in the rest from there. So like one of the monster types is a snar, and like that's the first 3 letters of a snare drum. So I kind of took sna and then kind of went with it, and like once I kind of figured that out, like it was just off to the races, and like by the end of the night I had all the names, and they were all kind of like cool and unique and interesting sounding. Or it's like if it was just like, oh my god, I got to come up with 20 names, I have no idea what to like it would have been impossible.
Yeah, and well at the same time, like if you have that sort of limitation, and you use whatever like you would like with the first 3 letters of an instrument, you may not have thought about it before, but you'll probably end up creating more interesting names. Like when you create something with the first 3 letters of guitar and then something else, you're like, holy crap, that is an awesome name for an enemy.
And that's been the case. So.
Something that you probably wouldn't have thought of. You're like, okay, I need something cool, need something different. Zebafin. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. That's unique. People remember that. But so many people do that, and themes, especially with music, is really cool. Dragon Ball Z does a little bit of that with like Piccolo, and they're real pun heavy, especially in the American versions and stuff like that, which is something Shovel Knight also does. There's an actual frog that all he does is tell you puns, and you get an achievement for listening to all his terrible puns, which is one of my favorite characters. I think he's in the first town.
That for those who haven't checked that out, you need to. That like. I'm just, it's just like when I found the guy, it was just like a combination of like laughing and like wah wah. Just like I wish I had some of them offhand, but yeah, they're pretty good. He's so punny. I'm
a fan of the puns. I can't help it. Problems, not too much a fan of the puns, but to each his own.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is like you don't like. I mean, when you're talking about like the Dragon Balls Dragon Ball Z names. Like, you don't necessarily have to like get that it's a pun, like, for it to be cool. You know, it's like, you know, Vegeta, you know, it's like, you know, kind of based on vegetable. Like, you don't have to get that, like, that's based on vegetable to, you know, get it. You just, it just sounds like a cool name to you. And,
yeah,
you know, it's like, once you dig more into it, like,
kind of simple, kind of silly, but at the same time, it's unique and sounds cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, going back to, you know, kind of the, you know, kind of having a unique, you know, theme for each, you know, level and everything. I also think, like, one of the things this game does well is, like, it kind of brings it all together, you know, in the last, you know, the tower areas. You know, you're kind of revisiting everything you kind of saw earlier in the game, you know, kind of like a final exam of sorts. So, you know, it kind of wraps things up, you know, and you know, the last, I mean, there's like a third level, but I mean, that's kind of just the boss fight, but, you know, you kind of see, you know, a lot of what you saw earlier in the game, you know, in the last couple tower levels, and, you know, it's interesting to me. You know, I think, you know, it's kind of making sure that, you know, you kind of learned, you know, from the earlier levels, you know, it's kind of tying, it's kind of reminding you of all that, kind of tying everything up in a nice bow. Do you think this game did a good job of that? Did you find that interesting? What would you guys think about that?
One of my favorite things in video games, period, is when a game makes me learn how to handle it. And like you're talking about with Shovel Knight, with the last level being sort of a culmination of everything that you've learned in the previous fight and previous levels, that's the way that they pulled that off. For me, worked perfectly. It's a very good way to sort of end the whole thing on a note of, you know, you've been through this long, treacherous journey and you've had to deal with all of these trials, but you've learned something from every single one of those, and you've accumulated more resources from all of your travels, I guess. And it's great because it makes the player feel like they just went on an adventure and that they're coming to the end of the adventure. It really puts the player, I guess, in the shoes of Shovel Knight. Like, you've been there the whole way with this charming little fellow with his shovel, and you've both, you know, become the heroes that you were always meant to be. It's sort of it's very I guess I'm romanticizing it here, but it's very, like, it makes it feel like destiny, like you're finally reaching you were supposed to be.
I believe his name is Mr. Shovelsworth. I mentioned that in the intro. But yeah, you know, it's, I mean, okay, so you were just talking about how you like it because you know, the game kind of forces you to learn it and kind of learn how to handle it. Now, I mean, this game does, I think this game has a reputation of being difficult. I don't know. I mean, I know there are certainly harder games out there, but I kind of feel like for a game to achieve you having to learn how to handle it and beat it, doesn't it kind of have to be hard? Like, I mean, it has to be. If you don't fail at something, like, you don't really learn to respect it. Like, if I go to a boss and, like, I don't really learn his patterns, I don't really learn how he works, but I still beat him. Like, have I really learned anything? Have I gained anything? So I mean, I kind of feel like the only way to really pull that off is by making the game hard and whip you into shape a little bit.
Well, the thing with Shovel Knight is they give you those options. It is difficult enough if you want it to be, especially with breaking all the checkpoints, but accessible enough for new players to be like, this is cool. Because, like, you got to think about like Super Mario and stuff like that. Yeah, some of it could be considered difficult, but it generally had a very low learning curve, because it's like, okay, well, I just run and jump, and that's what I do, and then sometimes I throw fireballs. With Mega Man, it was designed to be difficult, because back then you're spending $60 on a game which is essentially like 40 megabytes, something like that. They're small games. There's not a lot to them, so in order to combat that small size, they make them overly difficult so you can get your money's worth. And that's why you have the phrase Nintendo hard, because they were specifically designed so you're not, I just wasted $60 on a game that I beat in half an hour, because nobody would buy those anymore. And I think that's a little bit what Shovel Knight did. Granted, it wasn't a $60 game, it was a $15 game. But they give you those options with breaking the checkpoints if you want, to make it difficult on yourself. There's tons of cheat codes that you can input. Granted, you're not going to get achievements or whatever for it, but there's tons of cheat codes that you can put in to make the game more difficult or easier for you if you want. I mean, I think there's a God mode.
For Shovel Knight you're talking about?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, there's tons of cheat codes. Yeah, they put out, and it has to do with character creation. Like right when you start a new game, you can put in a certain code. Okay. And you get a certain amount. Yeah, you get a certain amount of things. So
like you put in like Elite Hacksaw for your character.
Yeah, something like that. Because I did a run with one of those cheat codes. I forgot what it was. I think it was a difficulty one. But yeah, they have this huge long list of all these codes that you can put in when you start a new game to make the game more difficult for you if you want that challenge.
You're crazy.
And they also have ones to make it easier for you too. So it gives you that sense of difficulty. At the same time, if somebody that's never played Mega Man or Castlevania or Super Mario Brothers 3 or any of those games wanted to pick it up because it looks interesting, they'll be able to have a good enough time to where it's not overly frustrating, and they can beat the game if they want to, because it's not typically a long game. You can, with the exception of me, which took me 14 hours because I'm good at games, you can probably beat this game if you're fairly adept at Mega Man and platforming games, probably in about 6 or 7 hours. Yeah, I mean, you could beat it in a night if you wanted to.
That's what I did when I first got it.
Yeah.
And it was a good night. I didn't feel cheated. I didn't feel,
Yeah, it was a fun experience because you're like, this is what the Nintendo, the NES could have done if it was a little more powerful.
Yeah, and
that's how I.
Go ahead. Oh.
Oh no.
Okay.
I think probably.
Yeah, so I mean, you were talking earlier about basically them making games harder to basically pad them for length. And, I mean, maybe this is me just kind of romanticizing, these sorts of games, but I like to hope that they're doing it for better reasons than to artificially extend the length of the game. I'm not naive enough to think. Well, I think that that probably is part of it, but.
Yeah. Well, in the NES era, that's exactly what they did, because that they had to. I mean, if you think about it,
why did they have to?
Granted, like Castlevania and 1, 2, and 3, those were difficult games. If you take out the difficulty of it, they're not particularly long games. Granted, in the Super Nintendo era, you started seeing things get a little longer and the difficulty dropping a slight bit. Because, just from, I would say, Metroid to Super Metroid, they were a little bit different in difficulty. Castlevania 4 was a little bit different in difficulty. I wouldn't think that Symphony of the Night could compare to the first 3 Castlevanias in terms of difficulty either. Because you have more time to tell story, game mechanics, explore bigger worlds, to where that length right there is going to be justification of that $60 price tag, rather than we need to make them to be able to play it as long as possible, because that's what they had to do. Even with arcade cabinets, they were designed to take quarters and be overly difficult because they want you to spend time on it to justify that price point.
Yeah, but I mean, I think probably what ends up happening is that you try and make it more difficult to increase the game,
and then people just get turned off.
Quote unquote length. But I think people end up just rage quitting because they're not having a good time. So I think you just completely backfires.
Well, like the Angry Video Game Nerd one, that game is ridiculously difficult on purpose. Yes. And it's designed
I need to have that
probably
guy on,
a little bit make you rage quit, and I did several times. I can't get into that game too much because it's just it's like calling back to that Nintendo hard thing just for the sake of it being Nintendo hard.
Yeah, and then you beat that game on hard, and you feel all great about yourself. Then it unlocks an even harder mode, and then you beat that, and then it unlocks 2 even harder modes. I think one is called impossible, and I think there's one past that which is even harder than impossible. I think it's like no one.
I think it's designed to give you an aneurysm. I think that's the purpose of it.
Like, it's, you know, I'm generally pretty completist with games, but yeah, with that game at a certain point, I'm just like, nope, no, I'm not falling for this. I'm not going to let you, you know, I'm not going to let you ruin my night or week or, you know, however long I decide to spend chasing after, you know, beating that game on the very hardest difficulty. But
I'm gonna have to go and actually try to finish that game one day, but I don't know if I have it in me.
It's pretty doable on, you know, I mean, whatever the default or one past the default. Like, I mean, it didn't take more than, you know, a day or two to do that. But beyond that, it gets just stupid.
Yeah, and that's why I like Shovel Knight, because it has that Nintendo hard feel to it if you want it, but it doesn't force it on you just for the sake of it being difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely a pet peeve of mine when games do things to take away from the experience to create the illusion of length. Because, like, really, they're not adding any content or anything. They're just making it take longer to beat it, but they're not really adding value to the game. And, you know, I mean,
they're just
things like this include
the
you know, just taking really long to get places, like slow movement speed and long door opening animations. I'm sure people can think of all sorts of examples, but also just difficulty. Like, I mean, you know, if you make the game super hard, yeah, it takes a long time to beat it, but did you have fun? You know, are most people going to put up with that? I mean, probably not.
Yeah, probably not anymore, but like back in the NES and SNES era, that's all we had. So it's like, especially as kids, like, you had probably 2 or 3 games that you had. Well, with me anyway, I had like NCAA basketball, Super Mario World, a tank game, and Jurassic Park. Those were the games I had, unless I wanted to rent them. Or rent something. That's all I had to play on my Super Nintendo. So I played a lot more Super Mario World and that basketball game than I did the other two, because the tank game was super hard. That Jurassic Park game can be brutal because it's a combination of like third person, like isometric type thing, and a Doom style shooter, which I died a lot at. So that difficulty kind of turned me off to it, and it's honestly not that big of a game. But Super Mario World is a fairly large game for what they did with it. And with basketball games, like, you can play those. They're all going to be the same over and over and over and over again, but it has replayability because there's 30 teams. So
it's like a roguelike, never the same twice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely does try and be difficult. I don't know. I just feel like this game does it right. You know, it's not trying to be hard for the sake of being hard. It's hard enough to get you to respect your opponents. It's hard enough to challenge you and make you a better player. It's not a cakewalk. But, you know, and then at the same time, you know, I mean, kind of like you've been saying, it gives you the chance to make it even harder if you'd like to, if you're some kind of masochist. But it's, you know, I definitely found it to be enjoyable all the way through from a difficulty standpoint. You know, it's not too hard in the beginning. I think the escalation is pretty nice. You know, you kind of in the middle of the game, it starts to get pretty hard, and then towards the end, it obviously gets pretty.
It tries to
hard.
kick your butt, yeah.
You know, to the point of being incredibly angry at propellers, those damn things.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
You know, and at the end, I think the end seems fairly appropriate for in terms of difficulty. Are there any other just kind of general comments you guys have about the design of Shovel Knight or even platformers in general? Anything we haven't touched on that you have burning thoughts on?
Overall, I think the thing that draws people most to this game.
Pixel art? No, just kidding.
Is its design?
Is what?
Yeah.
It's its design. Like it's like I said earlier. It is a love letter to, you know, all of those retro titles that people grew up with and and remember really fondly. And it really kind of hits a balance between being approachable enough for people that may have never played those games before, but also being very dedicated to the people that did grow up and play those games a lot and were totally enamored with them. The art and the music and all that stuff is great, but the main draw of the game is the design. Yeah. And I think that's something that's definitely worth celebrating. I'm very glad that this game came about, because there are lots of great games out there, but there's not really anything else quite like Shovel Knight.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with that. The thing is, I'm a huge retro fan. A couple years back, I went on this huge collecting kick because I first I wanted to get all the games that I used to have, because I still had my Super Nintendo and my N64. And I know, of course, I can emulate them, whatever. It's not the same experience to me. But this game has Castlevania 1, 2, 3, and 4, all sorts of that stuff in it. The anchors you throw are just like the axes, so you have Castlevania weapons. Some of the granted, they're platformers, and Castlevania wasn't entirely a platformer until Symphony of the Night. There's so many callbacks to the Castlevania series. There's so many callbacks to the Super Mario series, DuckTales, old Capcom games, and Mega Man, especially, which I'm a pretty big fan of Mega Man, in terms of that being one of my favorite, that series being one of my favorite platforms. So it's like they took all that stuff from all the games that I loved as a kid and still do, and then just condensed it into like this diamond of a platform. Because yeah, it does have its quirks and it does have its problems. Like, no game is perfect, but this is like they took the 16 and 8-bit eras and combined them all into something. Like, I know the phrase love letter has been said a lot, but it honestly is like it takes all the great mechanics and the frustrating things of your childhood, or if you just started playing retro games recently. It took all the good and sometimes negative things about it, and then just turned it into like this perfect form of all that put together. And that's one of the main reasons why I like it. And of course, I'm a huge fan of pixel art, and I love well animated or unique takes to pixel art, because it can look awful if you don't know what you're doing, and it can look fantastic. Like, I just played Metal Slug 3 last night, and all those sprites are animated so well. There's so many. There's like 60 frames just to each like enemy animation, which is ridiculous. And granted, there's not that many in Shovel Knight, but they made their characters unique. They made the designs unique. They made the worlds look fantastic. Like, they all have like, I think like 3 or 4 levels of like parallax scrolling. So that's one of the huge things that like pretty much every 8 and 16-bit era game did. So they just took all the good stuff about that and had the like what if factor. Like, what if the Super Nintendo or the NES could do this? Let's do that. And that's one of the main reasons why I love this game.
Yeah, and just real quick to touch on something you were talking about earlier, you were kind of mentioning it kind of borrowed, from all the, mechanics of, kind of earlier games. It's also incorporated some modern features too. Like, I think while you were on the phone, we were talking about how it kind of has the Dark Souls style of, when you die, you have to get back to where you died to recover, resources you lost.
Oh, your money.
Yeah.
Stuff,
So in this game, it's money, and in Dark Souls, I guess it was a Souls experience. But it's basically it's incorporating from a variety of different sources, and just kind of putting them together and doing a great job. And just to kind of share my own little thoughts, on the game. To be honest, this game has captured my attention for quite a while now. When it first kind of came on Kickstarter and everyone went nuts over it, honestly, I was kind of rolling my eyes, because it's just like, does anyone know if this game is any good or not? Do people just go nuts over any pixels you see, any retro art you see? You don't know if it's any good, and then it came out and everyone loved it, and I eventually checked it out, kind of towards the end of last year, and I was like, you know what? this game really is great. I mean, they really did do a great job of it. You know, I mean, like Ryan said, I mean, this game should absolutely be celebrated for its design. If they had the same art and the same music, and they didn't do the things that we have been talking about this entire episode, or they did those things poorly, it just wouldn't be that great of a game. Like it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be as popular as it is now. It would just would have been like a neat little throwback, and I think it would have been quickly forgotten about. But it's
they took a long time to polish this because their original launch date, they did not hit that.
Oh,
and they were pretty open about it. They're like, hey, we're doing this stuff. We got this stuff to do. We just want to give you the best title. And I'm glad that they spent those extra months polishing this game because it's so polished.
I mean, there's almost nothing that I see where it's like, hey, you could have done this better.
Yeah, you said something about the music. They actually used Vert was the one that did the music for this, and he's really good at chiptune music. And he was actually the things that he did. He actually used some of the effects chips that Konami used for Castlevania that added an extra 2 tracks to the audio file for the opening song "Strike the Earth." So they took so much from.
Good. Oh my god!
It's like one of those Mega Man songs that you remember. Like you hear it one time, it's catchy.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, you don't have to like necessarily remember like a Mega Man music for this to be good. It's good on its own.
Of course, yeah. But it's got that simplistic, catchy tune, and when you hear it, you know that it's Shovel Knight. Just like when you hear certain Mega Man songs, you hear it, you know that's Mega Man. The same with a lot of chiptune music from the retro era. But they just put so much time and dedication and polish into this that just from music design, platforming, playability, replayability, everything is almost perfect. Granted, you don't want a perfect game because that's boring. You don't want to do everything right. There has to be some sort of flaw.
People need something to complain about.
Well, yeah, that, and you need to have some sort of flaw to have some character to it, because if something's perfect, when I hear perfect, I don't think like amazing, good, awesome, whatever. Granted, they are those things, but when I hear perfect, I'm like, well, it can't get any better. It's reached its peak. It's kind of bland and boring. Once you reach that, it's like there's no, like, you can't do anything else. If Shovel Knight was the perfect game for Yacht Club, they would never be able to top that. They would never be able to improve upon that, which is why I'm glad that it's not a perfect game. It's close, but everything can always be improved on, which is one of the reasons why I like this game, because it's quirky enough to where if they did make a sequel, they could add so much to it that they probably couldn't get into this, which is really exciting to think about.
We can celebrate its design and its flaws. Yeah, have they talked about like a sequel at all?
I don't know. They're working really hard on trying to get it. They've got it on PlayStation now, and they have God of War as like a little extra thing for the PlayStation.
And I know they've got all the like the stuff with the stretch goals they gotta do, like Plague Knight
and they just announced
Gender Bender.
Yeah, that's coming out soon. They just finished up the Plague Knight launch trailer or something like that, and they're also going to Xbox One now and bringing back Battletoads.
Cool.
As like one of those mini bosses, which I think is going to be pretty interesting. Granted, I don't have an Xbox One, so I'll never be able to play it on there, but I think
I just really hope they don't pull a Super Meat Boy and go, no, we're not doing a second one. This is it.
Yeah, we did our thing. Or if they do it, it'll be like Binding of Isaac, and it'll take forever.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm fine with that. I mean, quality takes time.
Yeah.
And these guys certainly, when given time, is always do produce quality. So. So that was my conversation with Murphy and Problems from GamerGiving about Shovel Knight. Unfortunately, we did not have a good connection to Problems during that call. I guess you could say the connection to Problems had a problem, but we'll be sure to work that out next time. And just a quick reminder, the backseat gaming segment that was discussed towards the beginning, we're going to be doing that on Wednesday, March 11th. Should be around 7, 8 o'clock Central PM, somewhere around that time. Be sure to follow GamerGiving on Twitter to get the exact time. The URL for that is going to be twitch.tv/GamerGiving. So be sure to come hang out, watch people play Shovel Knight, watch other people criticize those people playing Shovel Knight. But it should be a lot of fun. We'll be raising money for charity, so come be a part of it. Come have fun. Anyway, we'll be back next week with a new episode. Thanks.